Hello and welcome back to a new episode where today I'm going to be finally talking about krautrock. You would think, given my propensity for talking about boomer art music, that I would have talked about krautrock a long time ago, but a lot of the times I don't really know what to say about krautrock, and a lot of that starts with the name of the genre itself. It's hard to give a good, hard and fast definition of what krautrock is. So I'm just going to go with probably the most broad definition I could come up with, which is that krautrock is West German baby boomer art music that isn't obviously just copying some other nation's variety of rock and has a distinctly German identity. Now, it's a very broad definition because it's a pretty broad genre. There's been a lot of argument over the years about whether krautrock should be used or whether it should be broken up into several other genres, but the term's what we've got, so I'm going to use it. As I was saying though, very diverse. You have krautrock that sounds like music for digital highways. You have krautrock that sounds like, a pagan ritual to resurrect the dark gods of the Germanic peoples in the forests of Bavaria. And you have krautrock that sounds like the interdimensional ritual dance of the space funkoids on the planet Lanoshk. That last kind of krautrock is the kind I'm going to talk about today because I'm going to be discussing Can. Can are, without a doubt, one of the most definitive, if not the definitive, krautrock band. Nobody else could sound like what they did. Their music is just transcendentally amazing. Rhythmic grooves that sound like dance tunes from other dimensions. Just phenomenal stuff. One of those great bands where everybody and their brother says that they were influenced by these guys, but nobody actually sounds like them. Their string of albums from 1969's Monster Movie to 1974's Soon Over Babaluma is one of the most striking achievements of any band, and I highly recommend you check out all of those today. However, and this is kind of why I'm making this video, Can are not always the easiest group to get into, and the simple reason for that is that during their peak years, Can were more or less a jam band. I mean, sure, their jams were astral and otherworldly and cosmic, but they were jams, and the group would basically just record themselves going hog wild in the studio, chop it down, throw in some editing, and slap it on the LP. And that makes them not always the easiest group to get into. You have to have a real sort of tolerance for long-form music to get into Can, and sometimes people can't always digest that sort of thing all at once. So today I'm going to be reviewing what I think is probably the most accessible Can album to a newcomer, their 1970 album, Soundtracks, which is technically a compilation, but it's kind of an album in its own right in my book. It's complicated. This to me is one of the two obvious ways to get into Can, with the other being to just do what I did. Grit your teeth and power through Tago Mago in one sitting, which is, on the one hand, it's a phenomenal way to get into the band. On the other hand, it's definitely not for everybody, and most of that is due to the fact that you have to be able to listen to this for almost 20 minutes, and I recognize that that is not everybody's cup of tea. Which brings me back to Soundtracks. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago that it was a compilation, but kind of an album, but kind of not. So let me explain that a little bit. It is technically a compilation. It is a compilation of tracks that Can did for various movie soundtracks in the late 60s and early 70s. It's basically their version of those two soundtrack albums that Pink Floyd did around that time. It was kind of a win-win situation for bands. On the one hand, you got to try out some new material, and on the other hand, you got some nice bonus cash from doing a soundtrack. from what I understand, the story goes that either the band felt that they need to put out product, or maybe the record label was saying, hey, you need to put out some albums. And so Taigo Mago wasn't ready yet, so they put out this. And because of that, it's always had kind of a weird reputation in the sense that the band don't look at it as a full album. They kind of look at it as something insubstantial and off to the side. And I think the original German release of it on vinyl actually had something to that effect on the back. Like, this is album number 2, but it's not the real album number 2. But it's functionally the second Can album because it is a major stylistic change from Monster Movie and from almost anything else they ever did. You know, much shorter tracks, much more written, more psychedelic, and arguably less kraut, if that makes any kind of sense to you. But this intro is going to be like 6 minutes long, so I'm going to cut it short, and let's just get into the album. So the album opens up with Deadlock. Now this and the next 2 tracks are all from the soundtrack of a 1970s spaghetti western by that name. I have never seen it. The film is apparently almost completely forgotten now, and I suspect that the Can soundtrack is probably the only reason it even has a Wikipedia page. It's a great little mood piece with some very dark, brooding guitars and a great rhythm section underneath, as was Can's way. Something I love about this band, the rhythm section was arguably the entire band. Like, it was all about Yaki and Holger holding down a beat, and everything else was just extra. But more about that later on. Tango Whiskey Man is great. I love how goofy and almost laid back the verses are, and then when the chorus comes in, the lyrics that Damo sings are so... I don't know why, but they've just always struck me as kind of funny. Especially this part. I feel like I probably should have said something about Damo in the intro, but yeah. So Can started out with a singer named Malcolm Mooney, a black American who apparently had some mental health issues later on, and that's why he left the band after doing only 1 album. And so they picked up Damo Suzuki, a Japanese man who they found busking somewhere in Europe. And he was with them for 4 albums, counting this one, but he's not exclusively on this album. There's a couple Malcolm Mooney tracks too, but we'll get to that. And now we have Deadlock again, but this time it's the main theme for Deadlock, and it definitely seems like something that plays in a movie while the title rolls. I would assume that that's where they used it, but like I said, I've never seen the movie, so yeah, who knows? I do really like it though. I like how big and bombastic it gets, and for that reason it's probably good that it doesn't last more than 1 minute and 40, because that kind of thing can kind of grate if it goes on for too long. Musically, this is a great track with a great groove, some cool guitar. I love the flute throughout the song. It adds a really interesting touch to the track that you didn't hear in a lot of early Can. Now, lyrically, I always interpreted this, and now I would imagine a lot of this was probably due to the fact that I was a sophomore in college when I first heard this album. I always interpreted the lyrics as being something to the effect of, "Don't bother me, I'm trying to sleep." But having actually looked up the lyrics, it seems like it's actually about depression and romantic loss, maybe, and just not wanting people to bother you because you're in a bad place. But half the time with the way Damo sings, you know, it's anybody's guess what he's saying, and this is one of those times for me. The first of 2 Malcolm Mooney tracks, Soul Desert, is pretty good, although I will say I always get a little tired of it after the 2-minute mark. and it goes on for another minute and 40 or so after that, so it gets kind of tiresome for me. But what's coming next is the best song on the album, so I can excuse that. Mother Sky is amazing. Easily the best thing on the album in my opinion, and the one track here that really harkens forward to what Can were gonna do in their next two albums. You know, this is almost like something you could imagine being on Tago Mago, only on Tago Mago it would be maybe 4 minutes longer and there would be a lot of weird keyboard freakouts in the middle, whereas this is just pretty much the same beat through and through, and it's fantastic. The film this is from, I've actually seen. It was a long time ago. I don't really remember it as much as I could. I believe it's called Deep End, and it's a film about two people working in a public pool, and it's sort of a character study about lust and obsession and that sort of thing. It gets very dark at the end, and I will say the scene where they use this track, if I'm remembering it correctly, is just so perfect because it fits the mood of the character and the sort of the driving, propulsive beat, and it's just perfect. Wonderful track, easily the high point of this album. Something I would highly recommend to anybody who's interested in Can. You know, it's 15 minutes, but you really do not feel that length.
She brings the rain. Yeah, she brings the rain.
And so the album ends with a second Malcolm Mooney track, the wonderful She Brings the Rain, an unusually conventional kind of vocal jazzy kind of thing from Can, who usually were twisting things up with weird rhythms and bass lines and whatnot, but this is actually, it works really well. It's quite affecting, even if some of the lyrics get a little hippy-dippy, like the line about magic mushrooms and whatnot, but it's a great track. I love Michael Caroli's guitar tone on here. For some reason, you know, the tones Caroli uses on some of these early Can albums always reminded me of the Byrds. I don't know why, but it does, and I like that a lot because I like the Byrds sometimes. But yeah, so it's a great track, wonderful way to close out the album, and a wonderful last thing anybody heard from Malcolm Mooney with Can for about 19 years. So that was Soundtracks. It's an interesting little album. It's probably the only one of Can's classic records that I could see somebody thinking was a little bit disposable, but I don't look at it that way. You know, I think it's a full album in its own right, you know, compilation though it may be. It's a really interesting intro, even though I didn't actually get into it that way. When I first went on my Can listening spree back in 2016 or 2017, this was the third one I'd heard. I'd already heard Tago Mago, and I'd already heard Ege Bamyasi by the time I listened to this, and you know, I got this like right at the moment. I kind of fell out of love with that kind of music for a while, and so I didn't listen to it as much, but I've come back to it a lot in the couple years since then, and I give it a few like 4 or 5, probably like 4 or 5 spins a year, and I really enjoy it when it's on. Parts of it I kind of forget when it's off, but that's true of a lot of things. And as far as an intro to Can, like I said, the whole reason I'm doing this video is I think this album is a good intro to this band, where you get an idea of what they're about, what their strengths were. You get to hear them doing some things that they never really did again. They were generally not about writing shorter, more composed songs. That was not usually what they liked to do, at least not in their prime. I don't know about how things got towards the end when those two dudes from Traffic joined the band and Holger kind of stepped back. I don't know how it was in the late 70s, but at least during the peak years when Damo was in the band and right afterwards, they were all about long tracks, and so it's cool to hear them doing shorter tracks, and you really get to hear songs by Can as opposed to 10-minute jazz funk interstellar dance of the rhythmic funkoid music. So yeah, great album, very deserving of your time. If I had to give it a numeric rating, it would be like a 7.5. You know, it's good, but this band did way better. And if you like this album, definitely check out their other stuff. But yeah, so until next time, I will see you guys later.